I got nothing.
Welcome to Read Weens, the show where we read.
Yeah.
The only show where Weens read on the internet.
Yeah.
That's true.
I'm London.
I'm Thomas.
And I am Joe.
Woo, Joe!
Alright.
Today we're going to be talking about John Darnielle's newest novel, Devil House. Came out almost a year ago now.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think I bought it in November, and I'm like, I'm going to pick this for Read Weens, and then we just took forever for our Read Weens picks.
Yeah. Happens.
Yeah.
Happens. It's okay. Have you guys read anything in the last 2.5 months besides Devil House?
Yeah.
You've been reading One Piece, right?
I have. I've read just past the time skip. Basically cleared that in like a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good manga.
Good manga.
Epic.
Very good.
Yeah, you're almost caught up. Now you just gotta read the back.
I still have another half of it to go.
Yeah, but that's almost.
You
It's
can
almost.
catch up before it finally ends.
That's
Before
the
they start Two Piece.
That's the plan, is to finish One Piece right as Two Piece starts.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
Thomas, you didn't read anything?
No.
Heck.
Wait. I read Dragon Ball.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was mostly decent, because I read all of Dragon Ball.
Yeah, Dragon Ball's good, right? And Dragon Ball Z's okay? Or something like that?
I think I've finally, with this most recent reread, at least when it comes to the manga, I've finally flipped. I think Z is better for the portion where it is better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's only better for like the first 2 sagas, and then it's a slow decrease from there. But yeah, and then I read pretty much all of Super. I read through like halfway through the Moro arc. It's okay.
Super a continuation of Z, or what?
Yeah, so the way that Z ends is
Everyone dies.
there's like a small arc called like Peaceful World Saga, where it's like a tournament and Goku like ditches his family to train with the reincarnation of Majin Buu, whose name is Oob.
Just boo backwards.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yes, and it's kind of a divisive ending. So Super and like Battle of Gods and all of that stuff takes place before that Peaceful World Saga. But that may not be canon anymore, because it's going to be real hard to make that canon.
Is it still Toriyama writing, or
he kind of,
or does he like have big ideas and he has someone else write it or something?
basically? So he's got like manga agents that like basically are like, hey, here's like what the fans want, and we think that you should write. And then he like basically writes out like a very simple synopsis that he gives to both the anime studio and to Toyotaro, who is drawing and kind of writing the manga. And they basically take those ideas and flesh them out in their forms. That's why, like, when Super was running, you can, like, find all sorts of videos and stuff that break them down, but there's, like, a shit ton of differences between the two canons, because basically they're just given some information from Toriyama, and they both kind of took different approaches to it. It's kind of interesting, but...
Was GT anime only?
GT was anime only.
Okay.
Akira Toriyama did, like, the designs and came up with, like, the concept and the name.
Was that supposed to be a reboot? I can't remember. Or was
It's a
Kai that
continu-
was
Like
a
a
reboot?
spin-off continuation?
It's a
kinda?
continuation after the Peaceful World Saga. So
Okay.
it's after Goku has finished his training with Oob, and then he gets turned into a little kid, and then the Dragon Balls that he was wished upon to be turned into a kid are called the Black Star Dragon Balls, and they get spread all across the galaxy. So he has to like come up with a big space trip that he takes with his granddaughter and Trunks, and they go...
Is that the one that everyone doesn't like?
Yeah, GT is like pretty universally hated for the most part.
Except for-
It has its fans, but
You like it?
no, I haven't even gotten through GT. I've tried it a few times, and I've gotten like to the Super Android 17 saga, and then I usually end up dropping off. But yeah, John Darnielle's.
You know, I
Devil
read
House.
things.
Yeah, what did you read?
I read, or I listened to the audiobooks of Plagueis.
Oh, yeah.
And Death Troopers, which is the Star Wars zombie novel. I was really into audiobooks. I was like, yeah, I can just listen to like 20, 30 minutes a day and get through a couple books in the next couple months. Plagueis was all right. I think the first chunk, because it's in 3 acts throughout like different years. I think it's like 10 years difference each time. Yeah. I think the first chunk's pretty good. I think the third chunk's pretty good. I think the second chunk drags a lot. And I think the book insists on making everything connected to the prequels. Mm-hmm. Like, every single moment of the prequels is like, no, it was actually orchestrated by Plagueis and Palpatine. I think that's bad. It's like, I'm fine with them doing that for some things, but it's like every single thing, we don't get to get character moments because it's like, but really, they're in charge of the money that came from the Boonta Eve. That's why the pod racers exist on Tatooine. We know that's fucking stupid. Mm-hmm. Overall, I think it's a decent book, though. I think Death Troopers is one of the worst books I've ever experienced.
Oh.
I think it was absolute shit. I think there were a couple good ideas at the very beginning, but I knew the Star Wars zombie book was going to be pretty bad. Yeah. But
should have been great.
Yeah. I think before the zombies actually show up, like when it's just like a plague kind of going through this Imperial prison, I think it's pretty okay. Mm. Once the zombies show up, it's really bad. They then introduce, like, spoilers for Death Troopers. Han Solo and Chewbacca show up, and then it's pretty much just their book, and it's ass. And I hate the way they're written in that book. And the ending's really unsatisfying. All the characters suck. It's just a terrible, terrible book. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to listen to an audiobook for a while. So I've been listening like podcasts again. He's like, I cannot listen to another Star Wars audiobook. And that's like all the audiobooks I own right now are Star Wars ones. And I'm like, there are some that I want to be, but I'm in such a sour mood for Star Wars books right now that I'm like, I'm going to hold off.
Yeah.
I also reread the first 5 issues of the High Republic, because there's 15 issues of that, and then the new wave of High Republic just started. Like season 2 or whatever of it. So I'm trying to catch up with that so I can continue on. And it's really good. I think the High Republic's, the comics at least, are really good. Mm-hmm. Let's see if I read anything else in the last couple weeks or months. Oh yeah. I read, let's see. Darth Plagueis. I read Batman Black Mirror, which is set when...
Love that episode of Black Mirror.
I think it's Dick Grayson that he becomes Batman. Mm-hmm. It's an older Dick. Bruce Wayne is supposedly dead at that point. I think it's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I liked the central premise and the villains in that one. Mm-hmm. I read Godzilla vs. Power Rangers. It was a 5-issue run.
Sounds pretty cool.
It was pretty cool. I don't think it ever gets as grandiose as it wants to be. And I think it's rushed. I think 5 issues was too short for what it wanted to be. I think an 8-issue run would have really helped it. And I read the first book of Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes, which is just a collection of the first 12 issues. And that one is mostly good, but the art's not great, and the very white, very old writer of it is trying to write for, like, brown teenagers, and it's a little cringy at times. But overall, it was interesting.
There's nothing cringy about that.
Peacemaker is in the book.
It's just trying to relate.
Peacemaker is in the book, and he also has, like, some of the, like, Blue Beetle, like, DNA in him, because he, like, touched an ancient tomb. It's very strange. But yeah, overall, I had some pretty good reads the last couple months, besides Death Troopers. Everything else I enjoyed. Yeah, that's what I read. And I think I'm like 3 chapters behind on One Piece. Because I'll just like get a month or 2 behind, then I'll just reread them all. Or I'll just read them all. Because I can't... Reading a single chapter is just... It doesn't work for me. I'm like, this... Can't just read 17 pages.
That's fair. I'm used to it at this point because I've been doing it for so many years. But
It's like single issues. It's really hard for me to read like a single issue. I'm like, I wait until I have like 4 or 5. But then that makes it so I like just don't read them for a while. I'm like, oh, I'm 15 behind. Same thing with like books. Like I can't read The Devil House. Whenever I read at least like 80 pages. I couldn't just read like 10 pages.
oh yeah,
And to be fair, with the way it's structured, that kind of makes sense.
Well, like any book, it's hard for me to read like just a tiny bit. I'm like, I need to read for like an hour. I want to read for like an hour, at least.
it's fair.
Like I think I read this in like 4 little like hour long or hour and a half long increments. I think I started strong and I read like the first 80 pages and then didn't pick it up for like a month and then I just read it all. But yes, let's talk about Devil House. Previously, we have already talked about Wolf and White Van and Universal Harvester, which I think we all enjoyed Wolf and White Van.
Yeah.
And I think I enjoyed Universal Harvester. You thought it was like okay?
Yeah, that's where I had some kind of issues with the John Darnielle storytelling in novel format.
And what I can't remember what you thought of Universal.
I thought it was better than Wolf and White Van, mainly because I understood the way it was written better. Overall, I think, just before we kind of dig into the nitty-gritty, I think this is the format that he was playing with the first 2 done better, but still I had some issues following who I was while reading the book.
Yeah, no, I definitely got some of that too.
I understand most of it, I think. But there were definitely points where I'm like, wait, hold on, who am I again? And then I had to jump back like 15 pages and be like, right, that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because of like the long form I was reading in, I don't think that ever really happened to me. I do think the last like 3 pages of the book, it felt like a truck hit me.
Yeah.
I was kind of like seeing what he was going to do with it. I'm like, early in the book, I'm like, what if he did this? And then I forgot about that because early in the book was like when I read it like a month and a half ago. And then I'm like, oh, fuck, I forgot I called this. So yeah, I was telling Thomas when we were reading Screen Reads, there are a lot of people on Goodreads that really don't like this book.
That's very fair.
Because there are a lot of people that either are like mostly true crime readers, which this book
kind of spits in the face of true crime.
Yeah, maybe not spits it, but is like, hey, we have to be conscious of what we like read and how we like interact with stories, especially if they have real life consequences, real life victims. And a lot of people that like true crime really don't like it when you tell them that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the central premise of this book is our main character.
Which, do we ever get a name for him?
Yeah,
Gage?
we do. It's Gage.
It is Gage, okay.
That's his last name. Or is that his first name?
That's his first name.
Gage.
It's what he keeps teasing people about, like, oh, yeah, that's what my mom called me, so that's what I'm stuck with. That's when he's, like, talking to his neighbor.
Gage Chandler. That's right.
That's it, right, yeah.
Chandler's, like, the fucking royal name or whatever.
Yeah. So Gage Chandler is a true crime writer. He's had a moderate amount of success with a couple of his last books. And he's like kind of searching for the next big thing. And his like agent, he tells him, hey, I got this great scoop. It's this small town, had a murder mystery years ago. No one's really covered it. And the house that it all happened in is up for the market. So he moves in, and over the next couple of years, he writes the story. But during this book, you see a couple of different stories. He eventually goes back and pretty much rewrites his previous book about this woman in the White Witch of Morro Bay or something like that. I think that's what her name was.
Yeah.
Who is a school teacher who was like accosted by 2 of her students in her house and was going to be like robbed and maybe more. And she like fought back and killed them and then murdered them like brutally.
Brutally murdered.
And then like cut them into pieces and kind of went insane.
We'll get to that when we cover it, but man, that whole sequence was very, woo.
Yeah,
It just happened and then just kept going.
Horror imagery in books usually doesn't hit me. This
one hit very hard.
Yeah, there are some descriptions of specifically that murder that really but he really wants to. He wrote this book pretty much trying to rewrite history about her because she had been horribly villainized and he didn't see it as her fault.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on in the book, it shifts to after he had read a letter from the victim's mother.
Yep.
So it's telling this story while also he's trying to write this book about these young teens. Or I think they're late teens. They're like 17, 18.
They're like high school seniors.
One of them works at like a porn store, and then the porn store closed down, but it's still just like a vacant place, and he just starts hanging out, and then his friends start hanging out, and then their homeless friend comes back into town, and he starts living there. And eventually it all ends with a horrible massacre of like 2 people, and then no one's ever really caught.
Because it's still kind of up in the air as to who did it.
It's up in the air, but then we realize by the end of it. So, we're going to be talking about spoilers for Devil House. At the end of it, it's revealed that he pretty much made it all up.
Yeah.
And he made up all these characters. He took little bits of who they were in reality and put them in because he's like, no one would ever root for like this homeless man, even if he also had these same problems. But if you put it in a different lens where it's a child or you give them a backstory, then you'll suddenly feel like they're not the villain.
Mm-hmm.
So like he just reveals that no one existed. They're all just figments of my imagination that are loosely based on these real people, and I put them back like 20 years.
Yeah, and then he's like telling his like publisher friend. It says,
it's the friend that originally had lived in that town.
Yeah, and he was just like,
which is why he had originally like taken the case. He's like, I knew a friend there.
Yeah, he's just like, what the hell are you doing? Like, aren't you true crime? He's like, well, yeah, but also, this isn't really my story to tell, and I kind of feel really bad for like being this invasive. Yeah. So he just alters the story to make something that's not really traceable. He goes over like how hard it was to even find some of the people that he like loosely referenced, a lot of them being like homeless or not really having like any way of like contacting them normally. And just he's like, these are people that I don't want to write about, so I'm taking these small parts and making something grander so that way I don't feel as disgusting as he did.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that's kind of a fair way to approach it. I was thinking about like some of the movies that I like that like dip into true crime, and like Memories of Murder, for example. Like none of the like victims in that movie are like tangibly based on like real actual people. I mean, they're loosely based on like that serial killer, but they're not directly actually referencing anyone who really existed. So, and I think that it can be a pretty good middle ground to take, but it can still lead to doors being opened that people want shut, like in terms of like victims and stuff too, though.
And Gage Chandler, he talks a lot about, in this book, he talks about how he doesn't, at the beginning he did write the book, but then at the end of like part 1 or something, but that's not the story. He literally tells you, this is not the story I'm writing. I don't feel right to write this. It's not my right. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how like this town had previously had a murder that had a like best-selling book and a movie, and everyone in the town hated it because it vilified them, it vilified the people, it vilified everyone, and it's just not a good look. And he's like, I can't. After talking to these people, after reading this letter from this woman, like I can't be part of the same problem. Like true crime does continue this trend, even though like I don't necessarily think that true crime as a genre is a bad thing. I think it's good in its like ideas, but a lot of it is still
how you execute
deifying like the killers, or even like the victims. Some of it is like we don't want to remember these. We want to remember them as people. We don't want to remember them as the victim of someone. So, like, I can get going into this book and being like, what the fuck am I reading? Because it's much different than even I anticipated. Mm-hmm. And I was used to John Darnielle's writing, and I really like his writing style. But I was like, whoa, this is...
Telling some coworkers, I'm like, yeah, I'm reading this book about this, like, true crime novelist, but, like, sometimes the story drifts into, like, a different person's perspective as he's, like, going through it, and you don't really realize that you shifted perspectives until you're given, like, a very clear indicator that you're no longer him, like, especially in the early parts. Gage very often, like, he'll be telling the story, and then it'll snap back and be like, so this is what I wrote. Yeah. And it's very, like, you are never clued in until the very end of it.
Yeah, I listened to an audiobook of this, so that was especially...
I feel like, because it's John Darnielle who narrates all his audiobooks.
Yes.
And I'm like, this specifically, I feel like I would really like listening to this as well.
Probably.
Yeah, I'd say I like the audiobook probably best for Wolf and White Van, because that one also had some, like, soundtrack on it. This one, if it did, I don't recall it.
The book's right below you. Can you pass it to me? So, there is a part, I think it's part, like, 4, where it switches to a medieval setting.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Was it just talked about regularly? Like, how did he structure that?
In the audio?
In the audiobook.
Yeah, I had a PDF, so I did, like, kind of go through it. I saw that they changed the font.
Okay, they changed it because Joe's, the way it was just regular font.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is, like, old-timey script.
Yeah.
What page is it?
Like 250, I think it started. 243.
That sounds about right. Yeah,
because I opened this, I flipped to the next one, I'm like,
yeah, no,
excuse me?
It's just normal.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense, given that it's like an EPUB format on that.
Yeah, I will say, that like, section, really confusing until, like, again, the very end where you're like, oh no, he's describing, like, the murder that happened at Devil House, or at Monster Video X, the porn store.
Yeah.
As soon as, like, I'm just, like, going along with him, like, okay. And then they mention, like, 7 nights. I'm like, oh, these are the 7 chambers oh, okay. I'm like, I understand what's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
It was really funny to read about a guy named Corbonian, though.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, in the audiobook, it was just, like, once he
was
started...
he like, I'm a little knight, I'm John Darnielle Corbonian.
No, he didn't put on any, like, fancy dialects, but obviously the speech of the book changes, so I was able to, like, oh, we're throwing it back here. Okay, cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do think that maybe, especially with the way that the script is written in there, I think that was probably the hardest part to read for me. Mm-hmm. I think it's, like, thematically pretty powerful, especially thinking back on it, once you know the entire story. But, like, I thought this book was easy to read for me. Like, I was invested and it was easy to get into for me, but that part specifically, like, okay, all right, I gotta get into a whole different, like, mindset, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely was off-putting to just, like, completely shift the writing sounds, like, what is going on?
And it starts to bleed in later on as well,
like
the way that these characters, these young kids, like, view themselves as, like, the creators, as the defenders of this realm and stuff like that. So I think that the chapter is good.
I think it definitely does a lot. It's just
physically was hard to read.
It stuck out as, like, well, this is a weird thing to put in, but I'm kind of glad it's there versus it not being there. I think it adds more than it would if it were just, like, changed to, like, something normal or closer to how the book is normally written. Mm-hmm. Which I think the book is generally pretty well written. John Darnielle is really good at, like I said, slipping your perspective away to something completely different. This kind of dreamlike writing, I think, is really, really fucking good.
I love the imagery that John Darnielle is able to put. His lyricism is the same thing. Like, it feels you are transported to another world, even if it's the world of a small little town in fucking Oregon or wherever it was. No, Oregon was Universal Harvester, I think.
Yeah,
there are references to, like, Washington.
Oh yeah, I think that's the White Witch. I think was one of those.
Because I know part of it takes place in California around San Luis Obispo, and then the other part takes place on like the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I get people not liking what this book
What
goes
do people
for.
not like about it?
Well, it's just like they want to read like a murder mystery, and that's not what this is.
It's more like a
or
deconstruction.
Yeah,
mystery, I guess.
it's a deconstruction of like
that, or people without even knowing much about John Darnielle or anything, based off just the way the book is marketed and advertised. I mean, you look at the cover; it looks like a pulpy.
Yeah,
this is going to be a haunted house book or something.
And it is, in the sense, it's like the hauntings of ourselves, the way that we view ourselves, the ghosts that we make. And it also doesn't help that this was on like the bestsellers list. Like this did the best out of like all his books, I'm pretty sure, because it's so a lot of mainstream horror like readers, it's a complete departure from a lot of different types of books. Which it's fine to read those regular like mainstream horror, but this is not.
It's very.
Doesn't feel like a book that should be mainstream.
It's like Dracula without any of the fantastical elements, where it's just like documentation and gathering of all these different sources.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. Gage is a fucking weirdo with his research. He's giant weirdo.
I started to reconstruct the whole house that I was living in. I was smelling the carpet.
It's all about figuring out time, perspective of time through the...
Which, like, as big as a weirdo he is, that plays, again, really well into, like, the dreamlike quality of it and his whole conclusion of, like, this is not my story to tell, because it's almost like he becomes these people that he's trying to research and figure out and try to understand what makes them tick to an almost invasive and perverted degree.
Well, it's interesting because it's also like the like ending thesis is like, is it ever ethical to write true crime, pretty much? Like, are we ever in a position that we should be consuming and reproducing this? Like, I think we are. Like, but that's definitely like, and he gets to a point that he's like, I don't know if I can write this. Like, I don't know if I myself am able to tell these stories anymore, because he's like, he tries so hard to be above the rest, where a lot of like true crime that he talks about is like very cut and dry. Who's the villain? Who's the hero? These people are evil, and he tries to get above that, and he tries to tell everyone's story, and even he feels like he can't without hurting someone, and not hurting someone in the sense of like, oh, you called them a name, hurting them to their very core, hurting their very being that makes it, when they wake up, it's hard to breathe, it's hard to live.
You're rehashing someone else's trauma for mostly your own gain.
And it also feels like he's fucking losing it, because that's all he does is he relives other people's trauma. He lives it. Like, to the point that I'm like, yeah, I would, if I was writing true crime, I'd feel fucking terrible all the time.
Yeah, probably.
And it's not, he lives in this town, he knows these people, and he's like, I can't do this. Even if it was like 20, 30 years before. I can't remember the exact time.
I think it took place in the 80s.
Yeah, so like...
This was written like, I think 2005 or something like that.
Oh,
the way that when I think he first moves in like 2005.
Yeah, because I know it's like early to mid 2010s, because he references like things that happen around that between like 2005 and like 2015.
I think he talks about the early invention of Facebook at the very beginning or something like that.
So, yeah.
He's just like, moved into Devil House today. Spider-Man 2 came out in theaters last year.
Imagine going to see Spider-Man 3 in theaters and then be like, well, I'm going to go to my serial killer home and act like a serial killer.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure someone out there probably did it.
Probably. Also, I like that this book isn't very much on like we're bad for doing this, because they go into detail about all of the people kind of surrounding the major like murders. Like we get the whole backstory for the teacher and how like she was just someone who freaked the fuck out, essentially.
And then definitely lost it afterwards.
Absolutely, lost it afterwards. Because, like, how can you not lose it after stabbing someone, like, 28 times? or something like, and then chopping their body.
Yeah.
Oh my god! Ugh. Reading it, I'm just like, this is incredibly visceral. I did not think I could get that feeling from a book. And then, kind of flipping the script later on, talking about the boys and how Jesse kind of just got like roped up into all of this, and how he was just looking for someone and found the wrong crowd essentially.
Yeah, no, I think this book is it's not as scary as it is really depressing. There's some really sad.
It's a lot of just small town horror.
Yeah, and the horror being that these situations happen because we give up on people. We don't give them proper resources. No. Yeah. Did you like this book? Or?
Yeah, I'd say I liked it. I don't think I liked it as much as I liked Wolf and White Van, but I definitely liked it more than I remember liking Universal Harvester. I think I've got some issues with just I think this kind of sporadic and spread out storytelling works really well on an album with songs that are 3 or 4 minutes. I think it's a little clunky in novel length. I think it's something that he's definitely refining as he goes along and getting better at. But personally for me, I feel like I need to next time I read a John Darnielle book, I need to reread one as a primer because it takes me a minute to get into his books. Definitely. I really struggle, especially with my ADHD.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the first every single time I go to read it, I'm very much lost for the first 5 to 10 pages of who I am, what's going on, what time frame are we in, story. But once I get going, I'm definitely okay, no, this all makes sense. It is all snapped together.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it is segmented into so many small stories, it's kind of biting into an apple over and over again, where it's as soon as I kind of warmed up to one story, it would be all right, now we're on to another.
Now we're on to something else.
Which, that's more of a criticism, I guess, of anthology storytelling in a certain sense, but I just think the way he does it could probably be refined a little better or done a little smoother. But I definitely like this book. Yeah, and I think it was pretty good. I think my favorite section was when it was getting into the boys who were chopped up. The more troubled one, they both had J names, so I'm gonna
Jesse and Jean.
Yeah, I think it was
we saw things from Jesse's perspective. We didn't really went into Jean's.
Yeah, the one that had the abusive father. I found that to be the most resonant point in the book, and I guess that makes sense given John Darnielle's...
Is that the section with the letter from...
Yeah.
No, I thought that I was actually on the verge of tears reading that. I was really I was really depressed after reading that.
And it makes sense that
there was a section during that. I want to see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah, no, it feels like a written account of the Sunset Tree at times.
Yeah.
It feels like maybe the most cathartic to write for John Darnielle. Because, you never really get over your traumas. You never really get over these things. But it's nice to see, newer and different outlets that he can, express these pains. And yeah, I think it's a rough chapter. It's a rough part to read, but I think it's maybe the most endearing and even subversive part of the book, because that's he goes out to be we've only been vilifying this woman. I'm gonna take a stand for her, and he's maybe I can't. Maybe it's not right to tell these stories. Maybe only the people that experience them can. Because he reads this, he's I fucked up.
But he even acknowledges that, those can be biases, because I can't remember what part in specific, there's a point where he's, thinking about going and, interviewing someone, but he's I don't really need to, because I know that they view themselves as, the center of this story when they're not. And it's going to give me, a bunch of false information.
Well, and even she acknowledges, a lot of this stuff, you're probably right, but it's what's the point of doing this? What's the point of dragging this back out into the public? You're just hurting people again.
Yeah, it's
even if it's just me,
yeah, it's people probably aren't going to read this and walk away with any sort of lessons. It's more of just morbid curiosity in people. So it's like,
Well, I think that's another issue with true crime is it's taken so much at face value, and it changes people's perspective so much. Like, there's not a lot of nuanced conversations happening around true crime, around the way that we view, because, like, he's not talking about serial killers either. He's talking about people that die through circumstance, like people that lived fucked up lives, which is writing true crime about serial killers. It's pretty easy to like put the blame on the serial killers. Like that, you can talk about how society affected them, but you're never going to necessarily feel bad for, hey, this guy killed 30 people and ate them all.
Yeah. So I found the part that I was looking for, and this is kind of right at the end of her letter going into the whole Chandler section. And I kind of want to read this whole part because it so perfectly captures the, I guess, thesis of the book. When reading it, I was just like, I kind of just sat there going, damn, that's kind of why we're here right now. Did I really think 10 years was a long time? You said, it's not. It's nothing when you were his mother. It is the blink of an eye during a commercial break, you said. That's how short a time you got to know your son before she took him from you. But you knew, you said. You knew how short a time 10 years is, and how easy it was for me to make that whole time, so precious to you, look ugly, worthless, pointless. But Jesse's life had been good sometimes. It had value, and he deserved to live, and you deserved to still have a son, and I didn't care. I only cared about the bad parts. How could I? How could I? Did I understand at last what I had done to you? Twisting a knife that had been stuck in your stomach since the day your son was killed. How could I? Like, that whole section is what really kind of strung the whole book together, of this guy going, I don't know why I'm here doing this. I'm just hurting people for my own gain.
Yeah. And he's like, as much as like he tries to be ethical about it, it's like it's so hard to do that if you can't even do that if these people still have living relatives.
Because at the end of the day, you are talking about someone's son who was murdered for your own curiosity.
And you're making profit off of it.
And you're making profit off of it, which, like, it very obviously, like, that's the struggle that's happening in Gage's head right now. This is a very interesting story that I think that part of him thinks that probably can bring closure, but the other hand is like, I'm also rehashing these things that people might have put to rest or have unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
I also really like that part because it's all written in the second person.
Yep.
I haven't read it. I know there's a couple books that are on my like to read list that are written entirely in the second person. I'm like, that'd be interesting. But I really like the way that he writes this because it's not just reading the letters. It's reading
his thoughts.
His thoughts on the letters.
Because I think Gage is mostly written in second person. A few exceptions.
He mostly writes in like first person or third person.
I guess, because it's more like you're ever seeing his dialogue. His dialogue is always explained to you from, I guess, his perspective.
Yeah.
But this is like directly like, you said this. It's like, and it feels like he's talking to me. And I'm like, I'm the mother. That's that's one thing. It like made me, I'm like, I did watch my son die. Yeah. This did happen to me. I'm like, wait, no, it didn't. Yeah, I think that I've enjoyed all of John Darnielle's books quite a lot. Wolf and White Van is still my favorite book. But I think I like this more than Universal Harvester, even though I enjoyed that one. I think that this one, this reminds me a lot of how I feel about Peppermint Candy, the Lee Chang-dong movie, where there's a lot of puzzle pieces and they don't, like, right at the very end, it clicks. I think this clicks throughout a little better, but then the ending hits and you're just like, wow. It, like, really, like, it hit me like a truck.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with that. I'd be interested to reread this one. Maybe more so than, like, Wolf and White Van I've read, like, 4 or 5 times now. Universal Harvester, I've only read the once, and I'd be interested in rereading that one. But this one, I'd be like, I think might do the best on a reread.
I think so, just because you know when you are and who you are.
I think it changes the entire lensing, the entire
100%.
Like,
Because like, oh, when we're talking about the kids at the porn store, like these are not real people.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the ideas behind them, the feelings are real.
Yeah.
Like, and isn't that enough? Like, do we need to say, like, oh no, this is a homeless guy, oh, he stole a prior record? Like, is there a point to that? Like, should we rehash these past crimes? Like, what's the point? It's better to just have those feelings behind them, what they might have done, like what might have happened if they were younger or better educated or had a better support system.
I think of John Darnielle's 3 books, I think this is his most refined. I hesitate to say it's my favorite. I think I still like Universal Harvester more, but I love all of the ideas, the gut punches, the shifting perspectives. I think he's finally got his shtick, quote unquote.
I will say, I'm pretty sure this is also substantially longer than both.
I'm pretty sure it is about 100 pages.
Yeah, I think those are 200-ish something pages each.
I know Wolf and White Band is short.
Yeah, Wolf and White Band's 200. Universal Harvester's 210, and then this is
400.
Yeah, 408 or something like that.
Yeah. I very reading all of his books. There's a very clear through line for how he wants to write, and it's still John Darnielle. He still knows how to write really compelling, very small scale, intimate stories, and then just rip out your esophagus at the same time.
This makes me want to reread both of these also.
That's
every time I get into John Darnielle one. It's the same thing with when I get really into one of my big Mountain Ghost phases, that's the only thing I want to listen to. Because I love the way he tells stories.
Yeah.
So I might reread those.
Fair enough.
Because they're also easy. Wolf and White Van I could honestly probably read in one sitting.
Yeah.
I could read it in 2.5, 3 hours. But yeah, I guess, do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't really have a whole lot more to add on to this one.
Okay. So, Joe, would you recommend this book?
Yes, asterisk. If you don't handle gore very well, I would recommend it. While you're not seeing anything, it's a very clear, very visceral image that it paints during those very graphic scenes. But no, I think if you're fine with, kind of looser narratives, it's a really good read.
About you?
Yeah, I'd say, also asterisk, if you can't handle books that don't take the most straightforward narrative routes, and if you don't like anything even remotely resembling true crime, you're probably not going to like this book. I think if you like true crime books, read this book.
Keep an open mind.
But yeah, don't just close it out. Try to actually see what he's trying to say and reflect on it a bit. But yeah, don't go into this book thinking you're gonna get ghosts and ghouls. It's not that kind of a horror book. I don't even know if I'd really. I mean, it's horror.
Classify it as
horror adjacent.
Yeah, horror plays a part in it, but I don't know if it's a horror book. Yeah. It's more of a philosophy piece.
Yeah, I would agree. Which I would also say is the case for Universal Harvester and Wolf and White. But I think they're all
they all kind of skirt that line.
Which I think they all do fit well in if you're reading them. If you want to read everything by a writer, I think reading these together would be a great experience.
Yep.
I would also highly recommend this one. I think it's great. I don't think it'll be for everyone. I think you might get lost in the way he describes things and the way he shifts time and the characters, but I think it's very good. It's one of the best things I've read this year. Yeah. All right. Joe, what are we reading next?
So I didn't really have any ideas.
Or Worm.
No, we're not going to read Worm.
Solo leveling.
It was brought to my attention that Hunter x Hunter was finally put on the Shonen Jump app in its entirety.
Ah, yeah.
So we are going to be reading the first
300 chapters.
3, technically 4 arcs, but one of the arcs is literally 5 chapters long.
Are we reading
York
New?
We're reading through York New.
Okay.
Which is the first 108, 109 chapters?
Yeah, so like roughly about the first like 12 volumes.
Yeah, roughly the first 12 volumes. It shouldn't be any longer than like reading through like, I think, the Soul Society.
I think that was like
it's shorter by a fair few volumes.
Hunter x Hunter is my favorite anime of all time. I haven't watched it in like 2 years, but I've been wanting to read it, especially past where the anime goes.
Mm-hmm.
Will we be watching past, or will we be reading past?
No,
okay,
no,
I'm
no.
like, wow, they're taking their time.
We stopped before the next 2 major arcs, and one of the major arcs I think is nearly half of the run. It's over half. The Chimera Ant arc. That's roughly half the anime runtime.
Yeah.
I think about half the manga runtime as well.
Honestly, I mean, I don't know if you guys would be open. I'd be open to reading towards like Greed Island, because that's like the first 18 volumes, and that's about what we read for Soul Society and One Piece. But that's entirely up to
Let me
you
see
guys.
how long Greed Island is, real quick.
I will read all of Hunter x Hunter.
No, I think getting into the Chimera Ant arc, because that arc literally doubles the series chapter.
I will be reading all of Hunter x Hunter.
You totally can.
I'm just
I might reread into the Chimera Ant arc once we conclude.
I will very likely be reading,
because I want to read. I've read a little past where the anime is in the past.
Let's see.
This is also probably going to be one where we do actually record in like a month, because you guys are good at reading manga, not books.
Yeah.
The Chimera Ant arc, or not Chimera Ant arc, the Greed Island arc is about an extra 60 chapters.
That's fine.
So that would bring us up to chapter 185.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good stopping point for Hunter x Hunter, just because that is technically the tutorial for Hunter x Hunter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no better way for me to describe it other than these are all. This is our Baroque works, essentially, leading into the arc after Baroque works. I can't remember.
One Piece just finished its tutorial.
That's true.
Okay, so One Piece, like the East Blue Saga, is kind of like the prologue, and then like you could view like the first half of the series before Paramount War being like a prologue of sorts.
Yeah.
But now we're finally getting into One Piece.
Now we're in the final saga, and it feels like we're finally getting into the fine dining.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, it's been...
Okay, reading through Greed Island, so 185 chapters.
Okay, cool. Sounds groovy.
Yeah.
We will see you all in 1 month's time, unless it also takes us longer, like last time, like the last 4 episodes of Read Weens. But maybe we're all finally getting back into reading, and we'll be like, read!
It's manga.
It's manga. You can be like, I'll read this in a day.
Yeah. I mean, I'll likely kind of stumble my way through the Hunter exam arc, and then after the Hunter exam arc, I'll just be reading, because that's how the anime went for me.
Yeah, the Hunter exam arc it's 1 volume in the manga, so it's very short.
it's condensed.
I just read, with the exception of the Greed Island part, I just read through all of this probably a year and a half ago, so it's all relative.
I haven't watched or interacted with Hunter x Hunter in 2 years, 2.5 years.
That's fair.
It'll be interesting for me because I'm watching it for the first time now, and I'm 25 episodes in.
Yeah, you're still.
We're at Killua's house.
Oh.
Well, they haven't quite. They're on the mountain. They haven't quite gotten to his house yet.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited. I hopefully I like it more than I like the anime. I think the anime has been okay so far.
Yeah, I think the anime 2011 is a decent anime, but I think it's got some shortcomings for sure.
It's slow to begin.
It's slow to begin, and I feel like it doesn't. It's got this philosophy where it'll evenly spread the budget across all the episodes instead of trying to do the thing the normal weekly anime do, where it's let's fucking dump half our budget into this one sequence in this one episode, and then the rest of our episodes will look like shit for a while.
I think for me,
I prefer this way though. I think it
Yeah.
looks fine.
I prefer it for the most part, but there are certain
fights you're like, I wish this had $1 billion.
no, not even fights, just like moments or shots where it's like in the manga it's a lot more visceral, and then in the anime it leaves like no impression at all. But yeah.
Okay, cool. First 185 of Hunter x Hunter. Next time on Read Weens.